Welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council. It's October 24th. Mr. Kurt Wade has the prayer, and then I have some introductions. I want to introduce a group before we do our pledge.
All right, let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for our city of Murfreesboro. We thank you for our elected officials as well. Lord, we just ask you to let us make positive decisions for our city and do what's in the best interest of Murfreesboro. Lord, we ask you to bless our service providers. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Amen. All right, we have with PAC 538, we have Tate Hubble. So when I call your name, if you'll come to the podium, they're going to lead us in our pledge. And Mr. Tyndall gave the quote of the night. He said that clearly them coming to the council meeting, they're working on their perseverance badge. So Tate Hubble, Jack Hutchings, Reese Campbell, Maxwell Herlovic, and their leader, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, Webb, you and I went to golf camp at Fall Creek Falls back 35 years ago, if I remember. So Webb Hutchings, who is their leader, PAC 538. They're going to handle our Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, gentlemen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Webb. All right, you have the consent agenda in front of you. Is there anything that needs to be pulled off the agenda?
Not, I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, if you'll please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now move into new business. We have Resolution 19R24, an updated economic development plan, the TIF incentive for One East College Street development.
Mayor and Council, this is the tax incentive financing program for One East College, which is a development of our downtown city block where the First United Methodist Church is. Council had addressed this earlier and passed on the tax incentive financing. It has since gone to the IDB and gone to county and has passed, and there were some adjustments made in the tax analysis that was done, and so it was felt necessary to bring it back to council for their approval. Nothing's really changed other than some calculations of the taxing amount.
I have a couple quick questions.
Sure.
Have we done a lot of TIFs throughout the city?
I don't think, my understanding is this is the first one.
Okay, so I see some articles and some comments, but we're not giving the developer $6 million in cash.
No, that's not the way a TIF works. TIF financing is, and this one's specifically structured so that the development has to go in place and has to be reassessed, and then the taxes that are paid, the property taxes are paid, are rebated back to the developer. So it's completely performance-based. They have to develop, and they have to develop within a period of time because there is a cap both on the amount and on the time in which this would develop. And I think the important thing to understand about TIF is that while the property may develop at some point in time in the future, we don't know. This allows the city to control not only what's being developed there, but the time in which it will be developed by incentivizing the program. So instead of waiting 10 or 20 years for that block to develop, we know now that it'll develop now, and it'll develop to the standards that we would like it to.
And the reason I ask that, the taxpayer is not subsidizing anything in the development because there's nothing there right now, correct?
There's nothing there right now, and there's no tax on this property right now at all because the city owns the entire block. The other thing is the tax incentive is restricted to certain uses. So in this case, it can go on infrastructure, so streetscape and different types of infrastructure. It can also be used for on-site parking garage, and right now that's the plan, is it would be used for those two types of items. The on-site parking garage is being built more than what would be required by the project otherwise. So it will serve downtown and downtown businesses and people coming to downtown. It would be an amenity for them as well.
And I want to make that comment, and the reason why is, you know, we researched even adding 2 more floors onto the existing county garage, and that was going to be roughly $8 million that we would have had to borrow money to be able to do that. In this case, we're able to leverage a development that the council wanted to be able to control what that city block was going to be, as opposed to have probably the most critical piece of property in the downtown area, not know what the development's going to be. But in turn, we were able to leverage this TIF agreement to get a parking garage in the downtown area and it not cost the taxpayers any money. We don't have to borrow to do that. So I think it's important to understand the benefits that the taxpayer actually gets from this, and not having to have the money up front.
Right.
And to your point, Mayor, I think it's important that they understand that this is a $60 to $75 million investment into our community. And not only that, if we were to build the 505 parking places that we're considering having built on this project, it would be anywhere from probably $10 to $12 million for us to build those parking places. So a $6 million TIF is actually very advantageous, considering what we're getting out of the deal of a $10 to $12 million parking facility.
Could someone speak to the time frame after this, where we at, and where, something to the process as to where we are and where we're going in the coming months?
Well, once this is passed all the boards, and I believe that it has, once it goes through tonight, then I think the developer's ready to start on the project. I think I saw some of the representatives here, yes. So they'll start on the project. We have had some meetings on plans for the project, and I think there's some additional meetings coming up to you know, do the architectural work that needs to be done. And in the meantime, I believe they'll start demolition on some of the buildings that are there, and fence the property and really go under construction.
I've heard that the first phase of this is the parking garage. Is that one of the early things that'll be coming out of the ground? Is the parking garage? So something to help our downtown for sure.
Start the demolition.
You know, the other thing that's really valuable is the unique opportunity to preserve that corner lot, the old sanctuary building. I mean, you wouldn't have necessarily been able to negotiate that with just anybody coming in. So you're speeding it up, you're creating some preservation, and you're creating some economic opportunity at the same time. So it's a real win.
I mean, in my opinion, there are not many deals that we can look at to say what's a true public-private partnership that's a win-win for everyone, and I don't know how you can't say that this is not a win-win. The city's given up a long process to go through and get this. We are giving up some tax revenue that we could have if someone else would have bought, but now, long-term, I think this will be something that'll be transformational for the downtown area, so it's something very excited. If I could make a motion, I would.
If there are no other comments, I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll now move into ordinance 19039. If you'll also look on our agenda, the ordinance was mislabeled under A. It was labeled 33, so just for the record, I want to say it needs to be 39.
Mayor, this is a little bit of cleanup where we've gotten 2 awards, grant awards, one for fire, one for police. And in order to spend the money, we're going to budget to receive it and spend it in both of those cases, so it's a zero effect to our fund balance. Additionally, community development, about this time every year, we have a little cleanup adjustment we have to make. We now know what their carryover was from June 30 and what their new grant is actually going to be. So that also is a revenue and expense adjustment, and we need to make this budget amendment by ordinance.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll now move into land use matters. We have ordinance 190Z36 to amend the marketplace at Savannah Ridge PUD along Shelbyville Pike. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor McFarland and members of council. Our first item tonight for public hearing is The PDF is frozen up on me. Here we go. I apologize for that. First item for public hearing tonight is a PUD amendment located at the northeast corner of Shelbyville Pike and Joby Jackson Parkway. It's the Marketplace at Savannah Ridge PUD. This planned development has seen several iterations over the years. It was originally approved in 2006 as a planned commercial development. Baker Story McDonald was the applicant in 2006. They continue to own the property, and they are the applicant once again today. Back in 2017, they amended the planned development to add 30 townhomes and 4 single-family detached homes. Now, in 2019, they wish to amend the plan once again as they're wanting to adjust to changing market conditions. The main changes in the planned development now, as they propose them, are to increase the number of townhomes from 30 to 37, and there would be some improved access for the townhomes going back up to Hyannis Drive and back to the commercial development as well, in addition to going over to Wycheck Lane, to remove the 4 single-family detached lots that were placed in the zoning in 2017, and to relocate the stormwater management area to where those 4 single-family detached lots were going to be located, and that continues to maintain some separation from the existing single-family homes in the villages of Savannah Ridge and the proposed commercial development. And they're also looking to actually decrease the commercial square footage from about 195,000 square feet to 137,000 square feet with the new configuration of buildings that is proposed on site. The surrounding land uses in the area, as I mentioned, the villages of Savannah Ridge, single-family residential subdivision to the east of the subject property is zoned RS8. The Camino Real, which is zoned planned commercial development, is directly to the north of the subject property. And directly across the street from the subject property is a subdivision that is located in the unincorporated county. The Planning Commission took action on this, actually held a public hearing on August 7th and deferred action on August 7th due to some improvements that they wanted to see in the pattern book, and then took it back up again at its September 4th meeting and then voted to recommend approval at that time. City Council will need to conduct a public hearing on this matter and then vote on first reading. I'd like to invite Mr. Clyde Roundtree up to the podium, as I believe he has a few introductory remarks, and then the architect would like to come up and make a brief presentation as well. And I'll be happy, of course, to answer any questions that you may have. Sure.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Clyde Roundtree with Huddleston Steel Engineering. I'm here representing Mr. David Baker with Baker Story McDonald Developers, and we are excited about Marketplace at Savannah Ridge. And as Matthew mentioned, the primary changes were a result of, we had 5 different detention ponds on site. We were able to redesign that to concentrate that into one detention pond, and that detention pond became a rear portion of the property, so basically hidden by all the commercial. So it was a really good, advantageous move as far as the aesthetics of the overall development. And as Matthew mentioned, there were 4 homes that were previously approved on the plan that were single-family homes. Those homes were basically located on the concept plan where the stormwater area is going to be developed and enlarged. So that was the catalyst for the primary movements. It did allow us, with some of the redesign, to increase the townhomes by 2. And as Matthew mentioned, we did not increase the square footage of the overall development as far as the commercial spaces, although we have relocated them a bit on the site plan. So all in all, it's fairly consistent with the original plan, with the primary change being a stormwater-related change that concentrated that water from 5 areas to 1 area. I'm available for any specific questions you may have regarding the overall site plan. Mr. Steve Marr from MGM Architecture is here to represent the architecture. As Matthew mentioned, on September 4th, it was Steve who primarily presented the PowerPoint presentation related specifically to architecture. And Mr. Bill Huddleston's here from Huddleston Engineering related to any stormwater issues. and then any traffic issues that may come up. So with that in mind, Steve, if you go ahead and.
Evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Steve Marr, MJM Architects out of Nashville, Tennessee. As was just described, we have been working very closely with staff over a number of years and a number of iterations to develop the architecture for the development in question. We have focused on primarily the meeting the requirements of the pattern book, which was published and then recently updated again. And that was part of the redesign we recently went through to meet some of the new requirements of the pattern book. And we can get into those specifics if you would like, but generally speaking, we've developed a language that involves masonry materials that meet the percentages required and the articulation in a lot of the details that are laid out in the new pattern book and the new guidelines that were published recently. The center is primarily a neighborhood-focused services development. There is one food service or a grocer tenant and a number of smaller, likely food service, local businesses. Some national change will come in eventually as well. The development is broken down into smaller boxes that are well articulated and cohesive across the development. And you can see we have some examples of some of the architecture here. You can see we have broken down the facades with the masonry materials, vertical delineation as well as horizontal breakdowns and breakup of the primary planes. This particular retailer has worked very extensively with the Planning Commission, with the staff to manipulate their standard look and feel to be more cohesive with what is requested by the City of Murfreesboro. This is an example of one of the shops buildings that's adjacent inline. As you can see, we've noted some of the elements that are worth pointing out in terms of the architectural character. You know, we've broken the planes vertically, we've undulated the roof lines, we've created parapet walls, front elevations that vary across the elevations, materials that vary. We have thickened the cornices. We've included the base of masonry across all of the storefront as is requested, as well as foundation planning. This is a good illustrative example. This is that inline elevation with the retailer as well as at the building we were just describing. And then this is an example of one of the smaller shops buildings, we call them, that will be more prominent in the road. As you can see, it's well articulated, the materials are consistent, and again, it breaks up the planes both vertically and horizontally as is requested. There's a list of materials at the base of this exhibit. You can see that there's masonry, there's stone, there's a number of other materials that are accepted by the Planning Commission documents and the exhibits. This is one of the larger uses, retailer fitness use. Again, it incorporates a lot of the same design features that we've created as a language across the facility. And finally, the townhome. This is illustrative of what the townhomes will try to achieve. Slope shingled roof. Again, the masonry's included in primary materials. There will be some cementitious panels, and we've varied the heights of the roof and the elevations accordingly. This is coming into focus more slowly than the rest of the retail because the focus is primarily that front parcel. And with that, if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to address any of those.
I'm having trouble figuring out where the 60,000 square feet of commercial came from. Did I hear that right? It went from 195 to 137,000? It doesn't. I can't find where 60,000 square feet of commercial went away. Where is that?
Well, let's see, what, site plan wise, Bill, you might address that? Yeah, we went from 1 story to 2 story to 1 story in the 3, yeah, at one time it was 3. So that floor plate was reduced 60,000 square feet per floor.
So the 190,000, that was the original back in 2006?
That was, Mr. LaLance, that was what was approved in 2017 with the last amendment. And what they're referring to, if you look at on here, let me pull this up here, and I think I can show you where that's coming from.
Maybe it's not that important. I guess I'm just trying to, I was just looking for a lot of property being shifted some way or another, and I guess that's just not the case. It's just, if it's just in floor somehow.
There, I believe it was it's going to be a 3-story self-storage building. It's what's labeled as outlot number 7 right here, directly adjacent to the townhomes. It was over 80,000 square feet, 3 stories, and now that's down to 27,000 square feet right there.
Ah,
So footprint-wise, probably pretty similar, but with that.
I got you. So one other question, and this may be for Matthew, I apologize. Before we get started, I got a general question that I just happened to look on here and notice. Do you happen to remember, I guess let me just put it this way. If you look at where Titan Circle is, where the 4 single-family homes were on the original, the currently approved plan, I guess is what it's called. You following where I am there?
I am, yes, sir, right here.
I don't think I would see objections from the people who live across the street to having the stormwater management area right there, but will that allow any kind, is there gonna be a buffer?
Yes, sir, there is.
The
It's,
back of the building? You see it'd be to the south, looks like 12,725 is the big part.
let's see, they have a buffer plan, and it is kind of the turquoise color, and this is, it's identified as a type D buffer that would be along the right-of-way right there, which is a 15-foot wide buffer. So you'll have the type D buffer along the street frontage, and then the stormwater management area.
Here?
Between that dotted line.
Okay, so I guess the reason I was just trying to ask is making sure the single-family homes that are looking to the south, it looks like they might be facing south there on the Titan Circle, they're not gonna be looking into the back of the commercial building there with 12,000 square feet, right? There's something in between.
Yes, sir, and
Houses, now there's something, a buffer.
yes, sir, that's, it'll have distance, which sometimes is the best buffer. And that was a concern at Planning Commission that was discussed, is having adequate buffering to shield those existing single-family homes from the commercial. So it'll have the vegetation as well as the distance.
All right. Very good, thanks.
Okay, we need to conduct a public hearing. Anytime we conduct a public hearing, anyone wishing to speak for or against, if you'll come to the podium, if you'll state your name, address, you'll have 3 minutes as an individual, 5 minutes if you're representing a group. If you'll keep all comments directed to the council, we'll get those questions answered at the end of the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this commercial change, please come to the podium.
Way across there.
All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider on first reading ordinance 819 OZ 36.
I'll move for approval.
Can I make one comment before we do that? Yeah, I got some emails and some communications from folks in the community related to the intersection of Highfield. And so I had a reason to look at that and go out and kind of take a look at the site and drive it myself. And I do want to compliment staff and the applicant related to the 200 feet left turn in to that intersection. I know there's some folks that live there that are probably concerned about getting in and out of that access area. But when you look at the way the traffic is set up to flow on this development, this will be one of those situations where, people coming into town will take a right turn in and probably a right turn out, and the people going out of town may use that second intersection or second entrance, but my guess is they'll either exit onto Hyannis and to the Savannah Ridge Light or to the Joe B. Jackson Light as it gets restriped through there. So I think staff's done a great job trying to make that work and make improvements to what we have currently. So with that, I'll second the motion.
All right, Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you very much. All right, we'll now move to ordinance 19-OZ37 about rezoning approximately 26.2 acres along Cherry Lane. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Our next public hearing today is for the rezoning of a portion of the city-owned property, commonly referred to as the Jordan Farm. Property is currently zoned RS15 and was annexed about 12 or 15 years ago. The majority of the property is used by our Water Resources Department. However, this 26.2 acres was approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals about 3 years ago for practice soccer fields, and since then, practice soccer fields have been constructed on this property. It's currently zoned RS15. Recreational uses are only allowed by special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals in the RS15 zone. So the city felt it was in order to make a request to you all to rezone the property from RS15 to P, which is park zoning, for the existing use, which would allow the existing use by right, as well as not require any future modifications to the existing soccer fields to get a special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals. So we bring this request to you tonight to rezone this 26.2 acres to P from RS15. Planning Commission reviewed this request at its September 4th meeting and recommends approval. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
All right, any questions? All right, seeing none, we'll need to open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this rezoning request, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll now consider on first reading ordinance 19-OZ37.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, Mr. Blomley, we'll now consider a plan of services annexation and zoning for property located along Asbury Lane.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. The first presentation that I'll make will be relative to the annexation and the plan of services. We've received an annexation petition from the property owner of two parcels that are at the southwest corner of Asbury Lane and Asbury Road. The total acreage is a little over 10 acres for the two parcels. What bumps that up to 11.3 acres is that we are also including in the annexation and the plan of services 530 linear feet of Asbury Lane right-of-way and 500 linear feet of Asbury Road right-of-way. The Asbury Road right-of-way that we're proposing to annex would connect the requested parcels with the existing city limits. We've included a plan of services with your agenda materials. The annexation will be relatively easy to effect. Services will be able to be provided upon annexation. The one key thing of note would be that water service. There's currently a 4-inch line along Asbury Lane that will be inadequate to provide fire protection to future development upon that property. So the developer will be required to extend the 8-inch line from Horde Road down to the subject property to meet minimum fire protection requirements, minimum fire flows for fighting fires. But other services that we have studied will be able to be provided upon annexation. I'll be happy to answer any questions regarding the annexation or the plan of services. and I'll make a separate presentation regarding the zoning. The Planning Commission did recommend approval of this annexation and plan of services at its September 4th regular meeting.
All right, we need to conduct a public hearing this is for the plan of services, which means that we could service the area, and then annexation, that means we could annex it. So this is just for the plan of services and the annexation. If the annexation and the plan of services passes and the zoning fails, then the annexation and the plan of services are not applicable. So a lot of people get confused and want to come speak at the zoning and the annexation, but really I think most of the time the zoning is the main thing. So this public hearing is on the plan of services and annexation. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium.
All right, thank you, council members, for taking the time to hear our concerns tonight. Going to what you were just saying between the zoning and annexation.
Tell me your name and address, please.
Oh, sorry, I'm Doug Hayes. I live at 3858 Asbury Road. These two issues kind of coincide, so I'm going to go ahead and read my public statements. They might have some to do with the zoning, but I'm going to just go forward and kind of carry that forward with the zoning. So I've lived at this location all my life. I know the area very well. The area means a whole lot to me. Over the past 2 years, I have seen more change than I've ever seen in my life happen in this area. 2 large developments have taken root, Spring Creek and Kingsbury, along what was once a pretty quiet area of the county. My neighbors right now with the stormwater project and the sewer project, they're here tonight. Their entire land has been completely torn up and nothing has been restored. There's been jackhammers, rock hammers, all sorts of construction. So right now we're just kind of wary, and we're not against growth, but as of right now, with all the development that's happening, we are kind of overwhelmed. Our roads have been damaged. I don't know who's going to take care of that. Our creek has been polluted. Utilities have been interrupted, and our public safety has been jeopardized by the increase of traffic on infrastructure that is not designed to handle it. These problems are only going to get worse with the current developments as these stand. After all this happens, we get a letter in the mail from Peoria Falls. Peoria Falls, which wishes to take 2 nice homes in good standing on 2 beautiful 5-acre tracts of land filled with old growth trees, a creek access. They want to annex it, knock it all down, and put up 60 high-priced homes on a 0 lot line development with no yards, no parking, no real green space in the middle of the county, right on top of my neighbor's home. To call this an aggressive proposal, I think, would be putting it lightly. I think that this might be a decent development for some place closer to the city center, but for the outskirts of the city, I don't think it fits. We might not have, where we live, we might not have access, walkable access, biking access to any conveniences as the city centers do, but we have space, we have yards, we have some amount of privacy. It's obvious that the developers are trying to maximize land use for their economic gain, and I don't fault them for that. That's their job. But they also have another job, and that is to work within the limits, regulation, and zoning that the city sets forth. That's why we're here tonight, to decide what kind of city we want, what are our limits, how are we going to best regulate growth and balance quality of life. If this annexation takes place, it's an open canvas to what the city wants its future to be. Do we want to live in a city where getting in a car is mandatory to get everywhere, to sit in traffic on over-congested roads just to get home and not have an adequate place to park? Do we want to live in expensive homes built on top of one another, where we walk out of our back door and instead of having a yard, we have a concrete pad, a small patch of grass, barely enough for our dogs to do their business in, and no privacy?
Mr. Hayes, thank you so much.
Am I done?
Yes, sir. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak for this annexation request?
My name is Kitty McConnell. I live at 3818 Asbury Road. My concerns are mostly similar to what I had spoken to the Planning Council about. I'm concerned about the safety of Overall Creek and the people who might live close to it in the near future. It floods much more frequently than I think FEMA might have told you or estimated in recent past. And I understand that the developer has taken my words into consideration and might have altered their plan with that in mind. Traffic signage is my next concern. Our neighborhood opens onto Horde Road and Asbury Road, both ending at Old Nashville Highway. I believe the county owns both of those intersections. I don't know if I would be responsible to call the county to ask them to please improve the signage there, or if y'all would do that. I would appreciate it if y'all would. I think you probably know who to talk to. But the intersection of Asbury Lane and Medical Center has been well established as a trouble area, so I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the other two exits from our locale, if they can be improved. Line of sight needs to be improved, signage needs to be improved. The blasting that's occurred in our neighborhood from the adding of water, storm drainage and sewer has already affected our home. We've noticed settling over the last 6 months. We have a door frame that is now being slowly torn off of our apartment. So blasting in this proposed development is something that is of great concern to me. Also, we have an old well on our property that I think would be affected. I spoke last time about the trees that are on our fence line. If they are within 1 foot of our property, if there's any way that those can be saved, I would appreciate that very much. The heat also of a new development, when a new development goes in and the trees are removed, the heat in the neighborhood increases dramatically, especially if the roofs on new housings that are being built are of a dark color and absorb a great deal of heat. If you can request or suggest that the developer use light-colored shingles on the roof, that made a big difference at my house when I lived in Laverne. When I had to have the roof replaced, I went to a white roof. It made a tremendous difference, both in just ambient heat and the comfort of my own home. Those are the concerns that I wanted to raise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And you said the intersection of Asbury Lane and Asbury Road, correct?
Asbury Road and Old Nashville Highway, and Ford Road and Old Nashville Highway.
Okay.
I believe others have already probably discussed Asbury Lane and Medical Center being a very sore trouble spot.
Okay.
Oh. Chris Bennett, 3818 Asbury Road. I do appreciate these back and forths. I, though, find myself having partial conversations during these 3 minutes. So this is my rebuttal from the first 3 minutes that I had. Annexation of another property down this road. I brought up my just concerns about liability accepting this into the city. It's already congested, and we were basically scrambling to find out information. So there's a lot of traffic around, and a lot of people want traffic studies, but this is down an intersection which is around the corner from an exit on the I-24, which does have a current traffic study. So someone made the call that this is a concern enough to have the only traffic study that I'm aware of in the city. So I commented that it's busy, and I've heard that, well, it's still able to have traffic down. It's still doable, but no one's moved into these developments that no one's even started to move in yet. So I don't understand why we can't be on the same page here, that no one's moved into these new developments that are hundreds of houses. It's going to get much worse. The backup on I-24 is going to get much worse. These people moving to these houses are not going to know what's dangerous yet. They're going to kind of have a lot of close calls, if not worse. And then also, when we bring up these concerns, about, the construction there. Well, there's large construction vehicles. Well, we suggested maybe they could go around. And then we were told, we can't tell these private drivers where to go. But then we were told he could go around. So I don't understand this line of questioning. All right, and then, it's just, I don't know how to put forth my expression that these 3 minutes are people's entire lives condensed in these 3 minutes, and our well-being of getting in and out of our houses without getting run over is just mind-blowing. Of like, why do we have to rush this? Why can't we wait for the traffic study? Why can't we wait for people to get their ducks in a row? So it's just so frustrating, and I would just like to just not have people, I don't know, me and myself included, and my family, be at risk. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett.
Good evening. My name's Lauren Gamble. I'm at 3867 Asbury Road, and I share my neighbors' concerns about congestion and about it changing the fundamental character of the area. But I'd like to speak to two concerns in particular that they haven't really touched upon, and that is the historical nature of this intersection. I live in the McGregor House, which is an 1830s historic home. It was a Union field hospital during the Civil War. It's very precious to us. A prior owner sold a sewer easement to the Kingsbury development, so we are right in the thick of all the blasting and all the ancient cedars that have been torn down. And so to us, it's very visceral, the scar upon the land that these developments engender to the neighbors. As well, I'd just like to point out that Asbury Lane is a historic road. That is the route that the Union Army, that wing of it, took fleeing up. And the lane is itself historic, and I think that's important that that character be preserved. There is also a historic Methodist church, Asbury Church, which was located right at that intersection, possibly on this plot of land. I'm not really sure, but that provided safe haven for a lot of the Union troops that day in a cavalry attack. So there's a lot of precedent for this area being very important in Murfreesboro as a historic feature. So much of our Civil War history has been torn down. So that's a concern that I have as someone who is very invested in preserving the Civil War heritage of this area. Then the second concern that I have is the health of Overall Creek. We have a large creek frontage, and there's so much wildlife there. Even a bald eagle wintered over right in that area. And so it's just really important to take care of the wildlife there. All the deer, the turkeys, they're very special, and it's important that that creek not be polluted, that it be maintained. So the two, special things that I would ask of you are that you consider reducing the density and just provide more of a buffer so that this rural historic character of this very important intersection and area can be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sonette Myberg, and I'm the owner of the property. We purchased this some years ago in order to do future development. We decided to move on partner with Landmark to do a development, and a small development, not high density, a lot of homes. So we feel that this small quantity of homes will be a good fit for Murfreesboro and the area. Thank you.
I think I got your last name is Piper, is that right?
Myberg.
Can you spell that for me?
Myburgh.
Okay, and your address, please?
3790 Ashbury Lane.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the plan of services and the annexation request? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll now consider on first reading Resolution 19R PS 38 on the plan of services. Before we talk about go into Planet Services, can we get Mr. Blomley, I see Mr. Huddleston there on the traffic, there's a reference to a traffic study?
Mayor McFarland, we have 3 PEs from the city here tonight, Mr. Griffith, Mr. Huddleston, and Ms. Emerson, so.
Does that stand for physical education or private engineer, public?
I wonder the same thing every day.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. We have begun a traffic study at this location. Kimberly Horn, who is doing quite a bit of work for TDOT up and down the I-24 corridor. We thought it would be an advantage to get them to look at this intersection with its proximity to with the Medical Center I-24 interchange. We do have just some preliminary numbers back from them. They basically started their traffic counts, showing about in the AM peak about 100 cars turning right and about 30 cars turning left out of from Asbury Lane from that intersection. We've asked them to come back with 3 alternatives, improvements that we could look at to improve the intersection, and we've asked for one of those to include a traffic signal. Just one other bit of information, we have done some preliminary work with looking at the accident data from this location. Shows we've had 3 accidents there in the last 2 years. That's been reported. You know, some accidents are not always reported, but that's what we've had has been reported to the police. That's where we're at right now with the study. We expect the final results of the study back within the next month.
Are there other traffic studies we've done throughout our city?
Oh yes, we've numerous locations.
All right. All right, you have Resolution 19 RPS 38 for the plan of services in front of you.
I got one more question maybe for staff. The addition of the roadway into the annexation, you know, we've got probably what I'd call, you know, one of these potentially the same kind of situations out in, I know it's Central Valley Road, whatever, Liberty Station whatever that neighborhood is out there, where we've annexed this little short portion of road, and everything that leads up to it is county road, and then there's the S-curve on the bridge, and we just have constant problems out there with wrecks, and it's, well, whose fault you know, who's got to take care of it? Is it the city or is it the county? Do we have to annex the road and take on the responsibility of upgrading it, updating it, maintaining it right in the middle of a whole bunch of county road?
Mr. Lance and Mr. Huddleston may be able to speak to this. I believe that there's already an agreement to maintain the portion of Asbury Road, that intersection of Asbury Lane and Asbury Road. Is that correct, Mr. Huddleston? Yes, so the city is already actually maintaining that segment of Asbury Road that is in the study. But yes, we would take on, for any part of the roadways that were included in this annexation that we are not already taking care of, we would assume responsibility for maintenance of those roadways. And if there are any issues upon annexation with street signage, line of sight, those types of things would be things that our staff would review. And of course, if the proposed zoning and development is approved, that's the topic of the next item on the agenda, they would be required to dedicate right-of-way for future improvements. And we're actually showing on our major transportation plan an east-west connector that takes Asbury Road, kind of veers off, if you will. And we don't know the exact alignment of this, but it takes Asbury Road and goes across Overall Creek into the MTSU property. We're looking at various alignments. It could follow, that's roughly what is shown on our major transportation plan. But in the proposed zoning plan, they're also leaving a right-of-way here, reserving a right-of-way so that if we do determine that the best course of action is to loop that in for a better crossing here, then their plan does preserve that right-of-way. And they are dedicating right-of-way along Asbury Road for the future, for that future project that's on the major transportation plan. And MTSU owns that tract across the creek.
Could you speak to the safety of Overall Creek and how is that monitored or?
Yeah, I believe that I would defer to Mr. Huddleston on that if he would care to join me at the podium.
Good evening, Mayor, members, council. Mr. Shacklett, the Overall Creek is water of the state. Ultimate jurisdiction for its quality is the state of Tennessee. The city of Murfreesboro has some interest in that, and we're also issued permits to discharge stormwater into Overall Creek and have some responsibility for the quality of stormwaters that leave our system and go into the creek. We also monitor it and manage, or I say monitor it, we monitor it and visually assess it on a periodic basis to look for water quality issues and water quality problems. Rutherford County has a similar permit from the state of Tennessee, and so in areas where county jurisdiction and county stormwaters run into that, they provide the same service that the city of Murfreesboro does, both of us working through the oversight of the state of Tennessee.
So when a construction site is next to waterway like this, in the midst of that construction, is there monitoring to make sure that we're not discharging topsoil or something into a creek?
The contractor and the developer, the applicants have received, in this case, a permit from the state of Tennessee for stormwater discharges from construction activities. That does include an extensive inspection and monitoring program, and then the city of Murfreesboro provides periodic inspections and follow-up as a part of our obligation to the state under that.
And the design includes a detention pond, so I'm assuming some of the water that's created by the construction on the site is handled in the detention pond, or?
And you may be asking about Kingsbury that's currently under construction there. Because of the size of that property, they have to have a temporary sediment basin. Generally, those temporary sediment basins are used only during construction, and then the temporary sediment basin most often is converted to a permanent stormwater management area, often including detention and stormwater quality.
Mr. Huddleston, while I've got you up there, two questions. Number one is, as it relates to plan of services, does it seems like a good idea to get the results of a traffic study on an area that we already know there's an issue. We've talked about it for years at this point. Does it make sense to you to wait till we do have the traffic study to make sure to see what this Asbury Lane exit looks like if we get a light, if we don't get a light, to put a development in that's 40% above our kind of average density that we're looking for our basin? I mean, this is 40% higher density than our average density that we're looking for. Is that a place to put density, is where we don't even know what the traffic studies are going to say yet?
So I would address the plan of services and annexation as current conditions. And their purpose is can we provide services to the property as it sits today? We include some language in the plan of service and annexation feasibility study about future development, but generally it's a study about us providing services to the property and to the right-of-way as they stand today. So from that standpoint, a traffic impact study, I would say no. If you ask me about the next item on the agenda, which is the development plan and a potential for impact at intersections, there may be some merit to understanding the impacts on that study and the results of that study and potential improvements that could be made.
Do you think that the TDOT study is going to incorporate the currently zoned property that has already started development but isn't developed yet? Will they be taken into account what the traffic count is today, or will they be taking into account what we kind of know it will be based on the hundreds of houses or however many is coming?
So the scope of work that Mr. Griffith talked about was a city-funded study. It wasn't a TDOT study. Right, so that's a city-initiated action. It is
study that includes this subdivision or this intersection going on right now as well, as part of the corridor study.
No, the TDOT study is actually just looking at just the interchanges themselves. We've asked their consultant to broaden their study to include this intersection that we're actually paying.
Okay. But to answer your question then about the TDOT studies, their standard protocol when they conduct a planning study is to understand and analyze the traffic conditions as they exist today, and then to try to predict at a minimum a 20-year growth projection. It's not based necessarily on development plans, but on general growth trends observed in traffic patterns around the city and around the state. TDOT monitors several hundred traffic count stations throughout Rutherford County, and we have a historic trend of percentages of growth year after year. They consider that and the location, and they're able to make some prediction about the projected traffic volumes for a 20-year period.
But we didn't do any of that on our study. We just looked at what's going to happen, what's happening right now, and that's.
We have counted the current traffic there today, and we could certainly project things in there, but we're talking about a remedy that we're going to implement today, or a study that we're going to implement today, and so projecting out future traffic counts wouldn't necessarily impact that. We're analyzing a traffic condition, traffic situation that exists today, and so the current conditions are more important to us than necessarily projecting a future condition.
Mr. Huddleston, one of the questions that I'm quite frequently asked is why do I have to pay for the roads to improve when a developer is developing a property? My question is, does this project improve or will the money either be given for the improvements to Asbury Road and Asbury Lane, or would that be the city's responsibility, which would be taxpayers? Would that be the city's responsibility to make the improvements to that roadway to bring it up to city standard?
So for the development plan, we do have provisions in our site plan and subdivision regulations that require participation by the developer in substandard roads, and also in roads that are on our major transportation plan. So there is participation by the developer. Most cases we ask them to actually construct those improvements so they provide an immediate benefit. There are some situations where we will take fees in lieu of construction and reserve those funds for a larger, more regional or more community-oriented project later. So their responsibilities would include their frontages and the intersections adjacent to the project. The major transportation plan project has a community benefit, and that would be primarily a city and/or county and/or state funded activity. We haven't identified funding sources for that yet, but those are generally going to be our three sources of community funding. So to answer your question more specifically, Mr. Smotherman, it's actually both. There's specific funding and specific obligations on the developer, and then there would be general community obligations on the city for citywide or community beneficial road projects.
Right, and certainly in lieu of money, when you take that to do a section of roadway, it makes more sense when you have road frontage situations where they may be 10 sections of roadway. It's better to construct that as a continuous section of roadway versus having 10 sections of roadway built. So, but in this particular case, because it's at the intersection there, and I'm assuming that there's potential even of having a stacking lane or something for a turning lane or something, would this particular project be, let me ask it just clear cut, is this project going to develop the roadway and make the improvements, or will they be making in lieu of money for future development of this roadway?
So I think if we could maybe defer that question to the rezoning. I think the applicant has some information on their development plan and recommended road improvements. The short answer is yes, they're going to make improvements. They've proposed improvements that were discussed with staff, but they're going to present those to us, and maybe it'd be a little more information for us to talk about.
Are roadways, you know, just the infrastructure of roadways, are they considered in our plan of services?
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, I get the idea that you think, or the way that you're answering the questions is that whether or not these roads matter, or if they can handle the traffic, or if the people can get out as a left turn or whatever, that should be something that dealt with in the zoning. I guess that's why I said, as it relates to plan of services, it seems to me that it's a plan of services question.
Yeah, so the plan of services would study the current conditions of the roads, recognize any significant deficiencies, and any needed improvements right away. None were identified this. These roads are currently adequate for the conditions and traffic that are there. Now, are they at a current city standard? No. The city standard roadway is curb and gutter, 2 or 3 lanes with sidewalk. These are certainly ditch section roadways, but they're functioning adequate now. The pavement's adequate, the signage adequate. No deficiencies were identified in the roadways as far as the road bed and roadway itself.
So it's our city staff's opinion that the intersection at Asbury Lane and Medical Center Parkway is adequate?
No, sir. That was not my statement. My statement was...
I'm trying to get this straight here.
We did not study, and our annexation and feasibility study included the map that Mr. Blomley presented for you. So we looked only at this area. That's all we're considering for annexation tonight. And so we looked at the current conditions of that, our ability to provide services for that, and the feasibility of that.
Okay.
I'll just jump in and kind of make a general comment too. This is sort of a donut of city outside, or of property outside of city zoning, because it's bordered by 840, 24, and Broad Street, all of which are in the city limits. About a third of this area, maybe a fourth, is the battlefield. But my guess is, as the city grows, much of this, upon request, obviously, has the potential to become city property zoned inside the city limits. So as it pertains to the annexation and plan of services, I think we can serve the area. And so based on that, I'll make a motion to approve.
Yes, and I apologize, Mr. LaLance, I didn't understand that your discussion about roadways was specific to the intersection of Medical Center Parkway and Asbury Lane, but I'm sorry.
I'm talking about all of it, frankly. I mean, you know, the intersection of Asbury Lane and Asbury Road, I mean, I don't know how many wrecks are there. I assume it's not very many, and it's not very busy. It never has been, especially without any houses being built. I'm trying to figure out whether or not this is, you know, how we're supposed to make a decision, because really what this is all based on is the future, what's getting ready to happen here. If we annex it, this occurs. If we annex the one to the south of it, this occurs. So how do we make a decision if the only information we're getting is for a, 2 lots worth of road right there? Well, yeah, of course you can drive on the road in front of the property. Is that, I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure this thing out and look at it more of a, back off of it a little bit and see what impact does it have on the general area rather than this particular road. And maybe up until this point, 5 years into my council term, I didn't recognize that we never took into account anything beyond the borders of the road that are adjacent to the properties we talked about, which is disappointing to me, frankly.
Certainly,
we'll move on.
I think the important thing is what the plan of services is supposed to be for. And the plan of services is really, as Mr. Huddleston said, the plan of services is to say, can you serve this property right now? What I think you're asking about is other studies, and there are other studies that are done, and there's other studies that we can do, but it shouldn't be confused with the plan of services, which is a statutory requirement and requires certain things, serves that entire purpose of a study, because that's not what it's for.
Okay, we'll go on zoning. You got a motion?
I got a motion.
But isn't the city required within 5 years of annexation to bring it up to city standard? I mean, so are we assuming that within 5 years this will be improved? Is that what we're saying?
So I might look over at Mr. Tucker and Mr. Blomley on this one, but what I would say that is to provide the same services that are provided to other parts of our community. Certainly other parts of our community have ditch section roadways and other things, but providing fire, police, schools, and other standard services.
Mr. Huddleston, I'm going to look over at Mr. Ives over there. I believe it's to implement the services that are outlined in the plan of services that's adopted.
Yeah, that's what's required. Is to do what the plan of services says within 5 years.
All right, so on the plan of services, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Yes. Second.
All right, motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
No.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll now move to Resolution 19R A38 on the annexation. We've already had this public hearing.
If they're going to build this project, they need to build that infrastructure.
Is there a motion on the annexation?
I'll make a motion to approve the annexation.
I second.
We already had one on the public hearing we had was for the plan of services and the annexation. And then we'll have a public hearing on the zoning request right after that. So there'll be one more right after that.
We had a second. Are you ready for me to call roll?
Matt, okay. Yes, ma'am. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
No.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now move into to the public hearing on the zoning request. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. The next item is the zoning for the same property that we just considered. It's 10.6 acres located along Asbury Lane and Asbury Road. The applicants have requested rezoning to PRD simultaneous with annexation, planned residential district. The plan has changed a little bit since it went to the Planning Commission, and we'll go over those changes with you. But one of the main changes is that the number of homes proposed has been reduced from 60 to 55 homes. It reduced the density to 5.2 dwelling units per acre. It is a development that is similar in nature to the applicant's other development that is occurring on Thompson Lane right now, Tuscany, if you're familiar with that. They're single-family detached homes, but they'll be part of a horizontal property regime so that the homes are bought and sold individually, but everything outside of the homes is common area that will be maintained by the homeowners association. As I mentioned, the number of units proposed has decreased from 60 to 55. I will mention that that is still upwards of what the Murfreesboro 2035 Comprehensive Plan recommends. The 2035 plan recommends suburban residential land use character designation for the property. That is a density of 2 to 3.54 dwelling units per acre. So it's about 1.5 dwelling units per acre greater than what the 2035 plan recommends. The type of land use, even though the density is greater, is consistent with the 2035 plan. So the density is not consistent, but the type of land use, the single-family detached homes, is consistent. The other main changes that have occurred, and they're based on conditions that the Planning Commission made in its recommendation of approval back on September the 4th, is that the improvements to Asbury Lane and Asbury Road will be done prior to the issuance of the first C of O. And Mr. Smotherman, you were mentioning in your comments earlier, or your questions earlier, about the roadway improvements. The primary roadway improvement that is proposed with this plan is a left turn lane into the site on Asbury Lane. The applicants are committing, based upon the feedback they received from the Planning Commission in September, that all roadway improvements, including that left turn lane, will be constructed prior to the first certificate of occupancy being issued. They will, number two, they are ensuring that the road is elevated out of the floodway so that access is not restricted in a 100-year flood event. And this was a concern that was brought up during the Planning Commission about the rear of the property, the roadway possibly being underwater. So they're going to elevate that roadway so that in no way is access to the rear of the property jeopardized. They are increasing the size of the garages. There was some discussion at Planning Commission regarding the garages being too small for two vehicles. And so they are removing the smallest garage size that they had proposed in their pattern book. They're adding parking spaces near the dog park per the condition of the Planning Commission. So the amenities proposed include a dog park, a seating area, and a playground, and there'll be some guest parking that will be strategically located in between the dog park and the playground. And then they will also, another condition of approval was to raise the dog park out of the floodway. The dog park has actually been relocated closer to the interior of the site so that it is not actually located at the rear of the property near Overall Creek. So those are the primary changes that have been made since the Planning Commission public hearing. Planning Commission did recommend approval on September the 4th after a public hearing with the conditions that I outlined, and the applicant has revised the pattern book consistent with the conditions of the Planning Commission's recommendation of approval. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing, and as you've seen, we have other staff members here who are available as well. If you have no questions for me, Mr. Brian Dunn with Civil Site Design would like to make a presentation on the proposed development.
Mr. Blomley, while you're up there, on page 9 of their booklet, and I'm trying not to get too far ahead on the presentation, but it shows the turning lane. Would that roadway have sidewalks through that section that's being affected? I don't see any, but...
I don't see any either. I'll look towards Mr. Griffith or Mr. Huddleston. Mr. Smotherman, Mr. Huddleston is shaking his head no, and I'm thinking that's probably because it would be an isolated segment of sidewalk, and that would probably be, sidewalk would probably be better served along Asbury Lane when a more comprehensive project is done along Asbury Lane.
So would this be a situation where we would get some in lieu of money to put those sidewalks in place that are being affected by this development?
I believe that would be correct. If that, since it is a substandard road, I believe we would expect the fees in lieu of.
Mr. Smotherman, we generally look at the value of the roadway improvements they're making versus the potential cost, and if the value of the roadway improvements they're making meet or exceed the anticipated fees in lieu of, then we waive the fees in lieu of in exchange for the actual constructed improvements that were made. And so here you're adding pavement width and turning lanes that would benefit a future roadway project, and so we consider those adequate for the improvements. That'd be work that we would not have to do at a future date.
At planning, it said, and I can't see what, it says improve the solid waste pickup. What was addressed with the solid waste pickup?
Mr. Shacklett, if you'll give me a few minutes to look back in my packet to see what that was referencing, I don't recollect off the top of my head.
Okay. And Matthew, while he's giving his presentation, maybe you might want to look at something for me, you may not be able to answer this right off your head, but if you've got an easy way to look at it for when the public hearing's done, can you try to let us know about how many lots or units, I guess would be the best way, that we've already approved in this corridor between where this development is and down? You know, I know that a couple have come through, and I'm just kind of struggling. Is there a way for you to kind of maybe pull that up while we're waiting?
I think I could. I think I could tell you right now about. I believe that, and while it's fresh in my mind, Mr. Shacklett, what that solid waste may have been, and this gentleman, I believe, helped jog my memory. There was a hammerhead turnaround at the end of the proposed street that has now been changed to a cul-de-sac for ease of city fire trucks and solid waste vehicles turning around. Mr. LaLance, Spring Creek development, which is just to the south of here, probably about 1,000 feet, has 148 single-family homes and townhouses. And Kingsbury, and I'm looking over towards Miss Emerson, I believe, is probably around 200, 250 lots, if I was not mistaken. So I'd say probably around 350 or 400 between the two developments. And those are the two city developments on Asbury Lane right now.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have just a quick question. This would be mainly for staff. Why the significant deviation from the 2035 plan on what was shown there?
The applicant is free to request what he wants. It is a deviation. We have seen deviations before. The 2035 plan is a guiding document. It's not compliance with the plan is not mandatory. So applicants are free to petition the city council for something that deviates from the plan.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, it's up to y'all to determine whether that's appropriate or not.
All right, Mr. Dunn, we're ready for you.
Good evening, Mayor McFarland, members of the council. My name is Brian Dunn. I'm a land planner and landscape architect with CSDG at 2305 Klein Avenue, Nashville, Tennessee. I want to thank you all very much for your time. In front of you, you'll see the result of what we call our due diligence, as well as our end result, which is our illustrative master plan. But in respect of y'all's time, I wanted to go through this so that you understand the amount of detail that goes into the planning of a site. Even though there's only 55 homes in this site, there's a lot of detail that our company goes through in order to produce this document. So our team consists of civil engineers, land planners, and landscape architects, and we dig into the site, this site being about 10.5 acres, give or take, and we look at how best to address the development program that the applicant, Landmark Homes, wants to provide on this site. So we help them achieve that goal. So as we begin, we look at not only a local context, but also a regional context. Where does this site fit within the world? So we look at how far we are to a major city like Nashville. We also look at how close we are to the closest city, downtown Murfreesboro. We also look at the major transportation plans. We look at what roadway classifications that this site joins. We look at other roadway classifications around it. We also look at some proposed roadway connections that are being proposed in the area. Great question was brought up about the potential deviation from the 2035 plan, and I did want to draw attention to the fact that this is very finicky here, I apologize. The site here in blue is a 10.5 acres that we're proposing. This large area, this is the land use policy denoted as business park. This is a site that's owned by MTSU. So this whole area is, as a policy, primed for a business park. So we look at, from a density standpoint, all the folks that would potentially be able to work in that business park would need somewhere to live. So we thought a little bit of an increase on the density by what is currently called out as the suburban residential, we thought increasing that density a little bit was not really a bad idea. So we looked at all of those things, and we also looked at other developments that we've done in other locations near business parks and how those have flourished with a little bit of a higher density. But again, it's 55 homes. It's not 400 homes. So we also wanted to put that into context too as we were looking at the increased density. So we wanted to be mindful and good neighbors as well. We just didn't want to put a bunch of homes in there. We looked at the surrounding zoning delineations are around us. There's a lot of single-family homes as well as some multifamily homes around us and some PRDs that are going to be more on the west-hand side. We looked at utilities, making sure that we have adequate capacity from a utility standpoint, which we did. And then we begin diving in now. So now that we've looked at the local and regional context, now we begin to look at the existing site conditions. And the site is beautiful. I don't know if any of y'all have had a chance to go out there, but it's a very nice site. And I commend the neighbors for coming out. It really is a very nice site, and we've had a lot of good conversations about that. The site itself is heavily vegetated, and the contours are relatively gentle in this vicinity here. We also see that there's 2 existing homes on the site, and we see that there's a floodplain area here. And just from a terminology standpoint, the floodway is this line here, and that is not on this site. The floodway is not on this site. The floodplain of Overall Creek is located on this site. So did want to correct that point. So once we have the existing conditions, then we begin to say, okay, how are we going to create the development program? So we have to analyze those existing conditions. And this is a very thorough process that our company goes through. And we mainly look for 3 things. We look for where can the development pods be, where can the circulation be located, and also where can the open space be located. And this area that's denoted in pink, we found because of the gentle slopes and the less vegetation in this area, we thought, boy, this is a great area for development, and this would be a great area for open space, being mindful of the Overall Creek floodplain. And then maybe some centralized amenities could be located here. Some good access points onto Asbury Road and Asbury Lane could be located there. Some potential right-of-way dedication as well. So we go through this large amount of analysis. That's what allows us then to derive the illustrative master plan. And as Mr. Blomley has already alluded to, this site yields 55 units, and it's going to be a horizontal property regime. So the property owner is going to be able to have all of that open area maintained by the management company that the HOA would hire. Of this site, it's a little difficult to see this, but from an impervious to pervious surface ratio, pervious meaning that water can penetrate the soil and then refill the aquifers, half of this site is pervious surface, which as a landscape architect, that's fantastic. We want a lot of those aquifers to be recharging. So by giving that much open area, be it grass, be it landscape, be it detention, anywhere where the water can percolate through, that's fantastic. And over half of this site accomplishes that. So that's a little feather in our cap, and we were pretty pleased with that. From an amenity standpoint, we have a number of options. We have the centralized dog park that Mr. Blomley had mentioned, which was a condition of approval by the Planning Commission back on September 4th. We had initially had the dog park back in this area. So we've moved it to a more centralized location, so the majority of the residents would be able to utilize that location. We also have the playground in this location. We have some guest parking or some parking if somebody wanted to use the playground or the dog park. The goal behind this whole development is to get people to the living in the front of their house again. So often people, they go home, they may go run inside, have dinner, watch Netflix, and go to bed. There's very little interaction with their neighbors. So we want people in this neighborhood to feel connected with their neighbors. It gives them kind of a sense of value and a sense of place. So we also believe that that's very much in line with the land use policy here. Getting people reacquainted with their neighbors. And also getting them reacquainted a little bit with nature by preserving this area, which we were over-aggressive with this area at first, and we've retracted from that. We used to have 8 units in this location. Now we only have 3 units with the detention. And all that will be out of the floodway, and that would have to be raised up approximately 4 feet to be out of the floodplain. So we want people to re-engage with the creek, keep that as naturalistic as possible, make sure that Overall Creek is maintaining the wildlife that it currently has and the health that it currently has. Also, there's this feature here. This is going to be a retention pond, so it'll be a lake feature essentially with a nice fountain, and there'll be walking trails around that for people to utilize from a recreational standpoint, but also a communal standpoint. We'll have buffer yards around the site, and in those buffer yards, we want to preserve as much existing vegetation as possible. So we're going to commission a tree survey to be done of all existing heritage trees, which are going to be good growth trees, as well as any healthy material that can be preserved. And we're going to want to make sure we retain those roots and protect those during construction practices. That returning people to nature approach is something we also want to accomplish with the materials. We want the materials to be a very naturalistic feel. So we see a lot of natural stone here. We see a lot of wood. The kiosk would have that kind of mountainy feel, that earthy tone feel. Also returning people back to that sense of nature with the overall creek. Homes would be a mixture of masonry and hardy board, brick and stone. These are the examples of the architecture. Home sizes would be between 1,900 square feet to 2,800 square feet. Home prices ranging approximately $350,000 to $450,000. To Mr. Blomley's point, one of the conditions of approval by the Planning Commission was increasing the size of the garages to accommodate the 2 cars, which we were able to satisfy. Thank you very much for your time. Our civil engineer, Mr. Kyle Griffin, is in the audience as well, should you have any engineering questions that need to be satisfied. But thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. All right, we'll need to hold a public hearing on this. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this zoning request for 10.2 acres, please come to the podium.
Evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Daniel Bruner. I live at 3696 Asbury Lane, so I'm the property that would be to the south of the proposed development. A few notes, if you don't mind. I'm just going to flip back and forth here, a few things that I wrote about. Dropping it down to 55 homes, that is good, impressive. So that might make the 40% above average density 37% above average density, maybe, at that point, which, you know, that was good to learn about that, because I didn't know that until we got here this evening. And the above average density, making it like that due to the proposed future business park development across the creek, that seems logical, but at this point, I really don't see any benefit in that. If there is any more benefit, then it'd be nice to get some response on that. So my main thing is the quantity. Like when we spoke with the Planning Commission, our neighbors and I, we weren't opposed to a development coming in. It was more of the size. When you talk about only 55 homes and you compare it, well, that's good because it's not 400 homes. Well, that's irrelevant, because if you think about the size of the area people are putting in 400 homes, it's a larger acreage. So comparing it to the number, I really don't think that makes much sense. A few things that I was curious about, the floodplain is going to be changed a bit with homes being removed, but just found out that the proposed elevation would need to be raised 4 feet. Well, the elevation of my floodplain and the development floodplain is the same. The only thing that divides it's a barbed wire fence. So does that mean that there's going to be 4 feet at my fence where I'm here, and then now there's going to be 4 feet right above my fence? That's what I'm curious about, how that's actually going to work out. Even though there's nothing that's going to be built directly in that floodplain, it's still going to be developed. There's still going to be a road. There'll be green space. The dog park. This is more personal for me. I would like to see the dog park not on my property line, since I do have livestock. I just don't want to have to take chances with something like that happening, but that's more something that can find another spot possibly, just to sort of relocate that type thing. Let's see if I have anything else. Moment, please. And the fact that it was brought up with Bishop Asbury. 1812, Bishop Asbury was him and another fellow that came from England, one of the first Methodists that came to this area and was going around preaching their things. And Asbury Church which I wish I could have found more information. It was a church that had a capacity for 400 people, and it actually had a basement, according to what records say. And the coordinates put it right on this property. Whether or not those coordinates are accurate, I don't know. I just thought it was interesting that that was actually there on that corner, that Bishop Asbury was through this area during around 1812 doing his work, and he was all over the country as well, so he has many things named for him
Mr. Brenner,
in our country.
You're at over 4 minutes right now.
Oh, super. Well, I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments.
Love the history part.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Campbell, right?
Gamble,
Gamble, okay.
G-A-M-B-L-A, at 3867. I just have, I guess, 2 follow-up points. One, that was a surprise to see that that area is envisioned as a future business park. My understanding, and I could be wrong, but it's something to consider, if that's going to be used to justify the higher density, that parcel of land was deeded to MTSU by a former professor to be in perpetuity used by MTSU. So again, I could be wrong. There may be some legal wiggle room, but that was my understanding, so that would preclude it from ever being a business park if that is the case. And if someone knows better on that point, please, speak up. It's just, that was always my understanding. The second is that I had brought up, I've got a sinkhole forming on my property right now after all this blasting happened, and I had brought up in the initial meeting about the importance with that karst topography of doing a study, to make sure that we're not going to open up sinkholes on neighbors' lands, and I hadn't heard anything about it from anybody, so I just wanted to follow up on that point. Thank you.
Thank my lovely neighbors. I think they make a very good point of everything that we need to say. To Mr. LaLance's point earlier that I appreciate him bringing up, as far as the road goes and, who's going to be footing the bill. Right now, the road is destroyed. After the sewer and stormwater project, the road around that area is already tore up. I don't know how it's going to be fixed. I don't know who's going to be responsible for having it fixed, but these are the kind of things that we think about going forward. Also, he brought up the traffic study. The traffic study that's going on right now and the traffic concerns that are going on currently are just current. They do not take into account future use. And what's going on is that we have these 2 big developments that are going to be popping up with people any year now on top of what is being proposed tonight. So we have a problem. Are we going to make it worse? That's a big worry. Also, I think Daniel said it really well as far as the density. This goes against the 2035 plan. It also goes against the kind of housing that we have in the area. There's really nothing quite like it. We are all people that have yards, that have trees, and to go from that to basically 0 lot line houses is a big change, and a change that I don't know if we necessarily welcome. As far as the 2035 plan goes, that business park, she's correct, that land is MTSU land. And from my understanding, it's on a very lifetime long-term deed to where it is deeded to the agricultural department. So if that is going to be a business park, if there is wiggle room, then that goes into the 2040 plan and the road access. So the 2035 plan and its road and the 2040 plan are different and for different purposes. So the question is that land going to be developed? Because my best understanding is that it's not, that it was protected and it's going to be reserved for MTSU. That's a big question. The big question for me is I keep seeing this 2040 plan just kind of being swung all over a map. That road affects us greatly. It could affect them, it could affect me, it could bulldoze their house, it could condemn my land, it could go through their property. It scares us. It might just be a line on a map to you guys, but for us, it's terrifying. So what I'm saying is that if we look ahead to the future, there are ways where everybody could win. And I have brought this up to planning. I made a stink about it at the developers meeting, and I just plead with you guys to keep us in mind in the future when this comes up, to remember that our land, what we hold sacred, is more than just a line on a map. The quality of overall creek got brought up. Spring Creek is greatly damaged. Whatever got approved there allowed for development right up to the creek bank. The watershed has been damaged. We live right on the creek. We've seen it. We've seen how easily it floods now, how much cloudy and dirtier it is after the development. I'm sure sediment from all the surrounding developments that are going in there, it has damaged the creek. We see it. The proof's in the pudding. Simply put, this type of development is wildly out of place here. It could be great for a city center, but that's not what we're at here. It could exacerbate current problems. We already know about issues with sewer capacity. We already know about issues with landfill capacity and traffic capacity. I'm just begging you guys, let's not make this problem worse. Let's work for responsible growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Hello again, I'm Kitty McConnell, and I am right next door to this proposed plan. Mr. Hayes brought up the Spring Creek effect on the on Overall Creek. I would like to add to that. We live directly on Overall Creek, and we saw the amount of filth that washed in every time there was rain from Spring Creek. I get the feeling that Landmark is possibly more conscientious, and I really hope that if there's anything y'all can do to encourage them in that way. I was very encouraged to hear that they're hiring an arborist. Is that correct? To work on the trees, an arborist to protect the tree roots. That heartens me greatly. Regarding the traffic studies that were brought up, I don't know if y'all are aware of how many people exiting I-24 and coming in this direction, intending to turn onto Asbury Lane, find alternate routes and are putting pressure on the conference center, using it as a turnaround. Pardon me, this thing is blinking. Or going through the neighborhood that's behind in order to avoid Asbury Lane's left-hand turn altogether. I was there this evening. I had to make a turnaround because there were about 10, 15 cars backed up. And a lot of us only get home because of the kindness of strangers coming westbound on Medical Center who will simply stop and allow us to cross. That's the situation with that at Asbury Lane and Medical Center at this time. I'm not sure if y'all are aware, if there's any way that a traffic study can even take that kind of thing into consideration. Oh, did I have anything else? Spring water and utility lines. Right. I'd mentioned with the city planner last time that mine and the Hayes family's water access, what are those called? CUD lines run to the property. Yes, they're at the corner of Asbury Lane and Asbury Road on this property. So we need to either have the city move those for us or have the right of access preserved. Is that it? Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. McConnell.
Oh, Chris Bennett again. So we had a nice statement about what it's like to be on your front porch and enjoy life. You've made a big, decades-long effort to be, a nice neighborhood that lives together. I would just like to point out that in that traffic study, they're not even looking at current traffic. I mean, future traffic. There's going to be lots more cars. It's going to get way more dangerous, and it's hard to enjoy sitting on your front porch if you've been T-boned and you're dead. Thank you.
All right, anyone else wishing to speak? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Had several questions. I'm going to say Mr. Daniel, because yes, sir. Bruner. Mr. Bruner had a question about the floodplain being raised next to his property. I guess this is Mr. Huddleston, or how we handle that? Or, okay.
Kyle Griffin, CSDG. I believe he misinterpreted the comment. We have to raise a very small portion of our cul-de-sac 4 feet, but we have plenty of room on site to make compensating cuts to maintain the volume for flood storage. So if a flood does come in, the same area for the water to go is still there. We're not raising the flood elevation 4 feet.
Okay. I'm not sure the question, Ms. Gamble had this, I think Mr. Hayes. I do know there are two parcels that MTSU has in the area. There's one, I think the one that may be referred to as a possible business park is on Manson Pike, on the corner of Manson Pike and Florence, the old dairy farm that's on the opposite side of yeah. I've not heard anything since I've been here about that piece of property, besides, you know, trying to get sewer across the interstate at one point, which I think that happened, didn't that, Darren? Yeah, so I don't know. We've not had any discussions with MTSU about that piece of property. So, Mr. Blomley.
Yeah, Mayor McFarland, I mean, I think the discussion about that being a business park is something that stemmed from the future land use that was shown on our 2035 plan. You know, when the 2035 plan was done, it was simply impossible to know what every parcel was, who owned every parcel, what they might have earmarked it for or deeded it for. It was based upon what our consultant, staff, the Planning Commission determined at the time to be the best future land use for the property. Now, whether or not a business park ever develops on that property or whether or not anything ever develops on that property, no one knows at this time.
Right. And then we had several comments, Mr. Griffith. I know we've had lots of conversation as a council about Asbury, especially the intersection of Asbury and Medical Center Parkway. And we've had lots of different designs on the adjacent property, you know, the Williamson farm, but there's not anything that we have shown imminently that's going to be done, correct?
That's correct, Mayor. We are, obviously our statement until now has been the proximity to the interchange at Medical Center Parkway and I-24 is just too close to signalize it. We really want to look at that, and that's why we asked for this study to be done, just to make sure that to see what kind of, if it would have a negative impact if both those intersections were signalized. So we hope to one of the recommendations or one of the possibilities for that intersection will be some sort of signal. Now, whether or not you know, what kind of detriment that'll be into to the two signals at I-24 Medical Center. That's what we hope to find from this study. I would just to add one more other bit of information. We did include with the study all the developments that are currently under consideration by the Planning Commission. Obviously, there's a lot more land out there that's not developed that we really wouldn't know how to consider traffic increases due to that. But for all the developments that's been approved to date, and I believe it include this one as well, we did include some impact on that with the current study that's.
When's that supposed to be back?
Should be within a month. They've gotten most of their field work done, and so now just really just crunching numbers.
The other the questions, I don't want y'all to think that we're going just overlooking those, but stream protection. Mr. Hayes, you've sent us, sorry we haven't been able to get together. You sent lots of good information. Sinkholes, there's specific guidelines that I hate to say are above our pay grade, but they're above our pay grade on how those are handled, even from a council standpoint on how those have to be handled through the state and even to some extent through the federal government. So even though we may approve a development, there may be wetland mitigation or there may be some kind of sinkhole mitigation that has to take place. Even though we approve it, it may never happen because those have to be addressed. So we can't address those as a council level because that's not known until those plans are going through. So I could give you several examples of developments that have significantly changed from what we've approved because the other authorities get involved and those things are addressed. All right, council, question? I think I've gone through the list.
The CUD water lines was a question that didn't get answered.
Mr. Shacklett, I'll pull up the exhibit that CUD sent for our annexation feasibility study. It'll take me just a moment. As I mentioned in my initial presentation regarding the annexation, there's a 4-inch PVC line that runs along Asbury Lane, 4-inch line that runs along Asbury Road, and there's an 8-inch PVC line along Horde Road. And what our fire department has specified is that that 8-inch PVC line would be required to be extended to the property upon development to serve the proposed development.
When we do run, if this gets approved and we do end up running that 8-inch line down Asbury Lane to our development, if there are any services on that line, they will definitely be, services will be hooked up to the new line.
Okay. So if y'all don't mind, please direct everything this way. We don't care. We don't want to get in a back and forth out.
We would replace the services if we had to upgrade the line that their service is on.
Yeah, I think from a CUD standpoint, CUD, Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, CUD will not even allow PVC water lines anymore. They all have to be ductile iron. So anything that has to be addressed with those lines would have to be brought up to CUD's current standards. So in other words, there couldn't be any harm done to your property that would change anything that's there. We can't get in a back and forth. I apologize. But what I'm saying is there's protocols in place to make sure that if this were approved, that your property would be harmed from where it is right now.
This will be pretty simple for me, and just really it boils down to the back and forth earlier and the other plan of services thing. I think what we were getting at is that I believe that what our staff is saying is that we don't think that the Medical Center Parkway and Asbury Lane intersection is adequate. From my experience over the last few years of looking through a couple of different possibilities for roads and how we might cut this through, and there were maps drawn in the newspaper and that sort of thing, and it didn't go anywhere. And knowing that the 2040 plan might have some lines drawn on it, and the fact that we still have so many projects still left for the 2015 or 2020 plan. I just don't see that we have a good plan in place to address the issue. We don't even have the study back yet. And to me, it's just very simple. It's not a good place to be to be putting more development that is over the density levels that we think are appropriate, both from a sewer capacity situation and any other capacity you want to list, roads or whatever, particularly when we already know we got a problem. So I think it's probably fairly nice, but it does look like it's about as many houses you could possibly get. If the number was 30 or 35, I believe I'd support it, but not at 55. I think, actually, I will say that one of the people who spoke I think really said it best, that we do have to take these projects one at a time. And the only way you can do that is on a per acre basis. You know, if we say, well, it's only 55 here, and then we go next to the next piece of property and we say, well, it's only 105 there, and it's only that, then we end up with 40% more density than we meant to on the entire road. So that's kind of part of my point.
I'll make some comments just because obviously I came through planning and we looked at this. So I attended the neighborhood meeting and there were a lot of comments related to concerns about obviously the tail of this project. And if I remember correctly, some of the residents made a comment of, you know, we're looking for some compromise from the developer. And I think what you see in this current plan is a compromise from the developer. Now, there were 8 units on that back, so the density has been lowered. Yes, it's correct that it does exceed that recommendation, but it is lower than what it was as presented. In addition to that, I think a lot of the concerns the neighbors had were related to that back area being more preserved and set aside. I think you see that in this plan. I know there was a lot of concern associated with the trees. Because there's value to the surrounding neighbors for that. I think the developer has addressed that. And I think a lot of this is, you know, we're talking about density, and I would probably have a different position on the comment that the gentleman made, as well as Councilman Lance, related to it being 60 units and the density. I think part of the reason we do the plan development is to look at case by case where we think these things fit. I do totally respect the fact that you're in a very rural community today with acreage and dense trees surrounding you, but the reality is the city will encroach upon that, whether it be through this development or the next development. And I don't know how active you were when the other 2 developments came in for the 450 units. If you were at planning, I wasn't here then, so I don't know. Or if this is just solely because it touches your property, if it has conjunction with the major transportation plan, you know, running a street through your property, I don't know. But I do recognize that it's not townhouses, and we've talked a lot about that. Frankly, you know, my comment would be if we reduced the 8 units on the tail end of this development to 3, I'd rather give more density to the developer to pull all of those units on one side of this so that we don't have 3 houses on the other side of the street. And that's my opinion on that, because that would preserve in entirety the place that you were talking about, which was so important to you at that time. But it is, I do have to acknowledge that it is less, and I do think that, you know, 60 units is not going to be the thing that puts the Asbury Lane left turn intersection with Medical Center Parkway in failure. And so I'll have a little different take on that, especially because I do know Asbury Road can connect to Old Asheville Highway, and you can come out that way, so there are other access points. It's not locked into that specific situation. So certainly appreciate the comments. I know, Doug, you and I have had a lot of interaction on this, and I appreciate Councilman Lance's comments, but I'll let others speak. Oh, I have one more thing too. I took the time to look into this. I do know Spring Creek and parts of Overall Creek are impaired, but I took the time to look into this specific section of Overall Creek. And I know there are some algae blooms and other things that come through there, but I don't think associated with TDEC that this portion of Overall Creek is currently an impaired stream. That's what my research showed. If there are no other comments, I'm happy to make a motion to approve. Oh, have we closed the public hearing?
Yeah, the public hearing's been closed. Yeah, yeah.
I'll make the motion. Yep.
I second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
No.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
No.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll now move into fee schedule for planning department. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. One of the things that Mr. Anthony, our former director, brought up during the budget process was some fees that we felt were appropriate that we weren't currently charging. Things that we were doing as staff, investing a lot of staff time in doing things that there were no fees for the applicant. So we were investing staff time in specific requests without seeing the applicant shoulder the burden for those fees. And something that over the last couple of years that we as staff have been tasked with is looking at reasonable ways to raise revenues that are comparable to the level of effort, time, and service that the city is expending upon performing those tasks. So Mr. Anthony and I, during the budget process, looked at some of those items, and we have, in conjunction with Mr. Tucker, brought forth to you a resolution to adopt an addition to our current fee schedule, which would establish application fees for Historic Zoning Commission applications, which there's currently no fee for those, and a significant amount of staff time and energy goes into those applications. It's a nominal fee, but it does recoup some of the costs of the staff time that goes into those. Submission and review of master plans or master plan amendments, which we typically see at the front end of subdivision submittals. Submission and review of mandatory referrals. So we have...
Mr. Blomley, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
Are y'all all with Leadership Rutherford? Thank y'all so much for being here. Y'all are free to go. Y'all don't have to... Y'all stayed longer than anyone in the history of Leadership Rutherford. So if I had saw you over there, I don't know whose phone went off and if that was Lowrider or what that was that was playing, but thank y'all for coming. Thank y'all for participating in Leadership Rutherford. Y'all are free to go. Not that you have to listen to me, but do you need to get signatures? Okay. Thank y'all for coming. It's
Mayor McFarland, I think that Stephanie requires that they stay till the end.
Hey, well, I can say from participating in Leadership Rutherford in '98, if that were the case, that we would have had no graduates in that class, period. So y'all are free to go. Thank y'all.
I can't believe they don't want to stay for the fee discussion. At any rate, the submission of mandatory referrals. We have 5 mandatory referrals on today's agenda for which we are recouping no fees, and there's been staff time that have gone into those. And then mandatory referrals that involve a right-of-way abandonment. We have historically had public hearings at the Planning Commission level for right-of-way abandonments, and the city has borne the cost of advertising in the paper and sending out notices to adjacent property owners. So we've come up with what we think are reasonable fees, and we would ask the City Council to adopt this resolution effective immediately so that we can begin implementing these fees. We estimate that this would generate about $12,000 of revenue annually.
Move for approval.
Second.
Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Okay, we'll now have to schedule public hearings. Mr. Blomley, how many do you have?
We have a total of 6.
Okay. You have one very big one, right?
One very big one. So what we are proposing is for all of these to be on December the 5th. I think the first 5 are going to generate very little public input. At the Planning Commission, they generated very little public input. The 6th, of course, will generate a lot of public input.
Is the big one going to be November or December?
Oh, December the 5th is the date that we're recommending.
Okay. I would, just my opinion, even though the 5 may not have very much, I hate that, I assume that this other one is gonna take a while, and I hate for the other 5 to not get there. Is there anything on those 5 that can't be pushed, or we can only do 1 or 2 and then push the other ones to January, or even have some in November?
There are 2 annexations that go along with the other 5. Those require at least 30 days. I'm assuming because of the Thanksgiving holiday that the next opportunity for a public hearing won't be until December 5th. So I think this is the soonest day. The Planning Commission was able to handle these in a meeting. It was a long meeting, but
They're a lot tougher than we are, though.
we also start at 6, so something to consider.
Yeah.
I'll move for approval. December 5th.
December 5th.
Second.
Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye, reluctantly. Okay, we'll now do a mandatory referral for abandonment of drainage easement along Williams Drive.
This is the first of 5 that we could have been getting $750 submittal fees. At any rate, this is the first mandatory referral. It's a drainage easement along Williams Drive, which is in the gateway. We have a site plan at Planning Commission for volunteer behavioral health. The applicants would like to relocate an existing drainage easement on the property. It's at the very corner of the property. Our engineering department concurs with the request. Planning Commission considered it at its meeting last week and recommends approval of this mandatory referral. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
There's no questions or comments. I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye, we have a mandatory referral for abandonment of sanitary sewer and drainage easement along County Farm Road.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. These are easements that were recorded a number of years ago based upon what the layout of lots in the Chestnut Hill subdivision along County Farm Road were envisioned to be like. The current developer wants to make those lots deeper and has a different plan for providing sewer services to these lots. As a result, the drainage easements and the sanitary sewer easements are no longer in the place that fits with the proposed development. The preliminary plat for the new layout, which you see, the lots are much deeper. The existing drainage easement runs right through the backyards of those proposed lots. They're proposing to move that drainage easement to the very rear of the lots, and there are sanitary sewer easements that go perpendicular to County Farm Road, which are no longer applicable. The Water Resources Board approved or made a recommendation of approval of the abandonment of the sanitary sewer easements at its September meeting, and Planning Commission approved the recommended approval of the mandatory referral of both the drainage easements and sanitary sewer easements at its meeting last week. We would recommend approval of this mandatory referral. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll do the same, another mandatory referral on Joe B. Jackson Parkway for a drainage and detention easement.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Our next mandatory referral is for the southwest corner of Manchester Pike and Joe B. Jackson Parkway. It's property owned by the Hastings family. You saw a similar mandatory referral at the City Council meeting about a month ago for the north side of Joe B. Jackson Parkway. They're wanting to reshape the stormwater management area on this property so that they can develop 4 commercial lots. The preliminary plat was approved by the Planning Commission subject to this mandatory referral being approved by the City Council. There are several conditions recommended by staff, and the Planning Commission did recommend approval of this mandatory referral last week. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We have a mandatory referral for installation of private irrigation lines in the right-of-way on Lannister Avenue.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. This is for, as you mentioned, the installation of irrigation lines under a newly recorded right-of-way called Lannister Avenue. It's in the Blackman Station subdivision that was just recorded last week along the south side of Manson Pike. They, as a part of their planned development, they had required landscaping along the entrance along Manson Pike to kind of beautify the entrance. They need to irrigate that so it'll survive and continue to meet the requirements of the PRD zoning. The irrigation lines are proposed to run underneath the right-of-way of Lannister Avenue. Mr. Ives has been working with the developer on drawing up a private licensing agreement for those lines to go underneath public right-of-way to cover the city and City Legal Department, planning staff, and the Planning Commission are recommending approval of this mandatory referral to allow the irrigation lines in the public right-of-way.
So moved.
Motion is second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We have a mandatory referral for a drainage easement along North Tennessee Boulevard.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. You may remember that last month the City Council approved a rezoning along North Tennessee Boulevard for the Brookwood Point PRD townhome development. There was a drainage easement along the eastern property line of that tract that was recorded with the adjacent Northwood subdivision. It's a drainage easement that has no infrastructure located in it, serves no purpose. It will serve no purpose with the proposed development. Therefore, we recommend approval. The Planning Commission considered it, and it recommends approval as well. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
If there are no questions, I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Mr. Maloney. All right, we'll move on to the sale of property at 912 National Street. Mr. Tyndall.
Mayor and Council, this is a sale of a industrial property located at 912 Dashel Street. It was developed in the late 50s, early 60s as an industrial warehousing distribution site. It was an industrial development board project at that point in time, and the bonds have long since been paid off. We held the property. The current tenant of the property would like to purchase the property and to expand their operations at that site. So they've offered us a $1.7 million for the property. We believe that's a fair amount, and so we'd ask council to approve that sale.
There's no questions or comment. I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We have an acquisition of property for Habitat for Humanity, 523 Castle Street. Mr. Edelson.
Good evening, Mayor, McFarland, members of council. I have an item under community development. Tonight, we propose to reimburse Habitat for Humanity for the purchase of a vacant lot at 523 East Castle Street. This was envisioned in our Year 5 action plan for community development, be paid for by community development funds. We ask that you approve that transfer and authorize the mayor to sign a subrecipient agreement in a form approved by the city attorney. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We now have a HVAC unit natatorium contract.
Thank you, Mayor.
Did I say that right?
Natatorium.
Natatorium, okay. Is that after you, Nate?
I wish.
Get it? Natatorium?
I get it now.
Yeah, okay.
I never thought of it that way, though.
It's late, man, and I'm all
I'll
hopped
take
up on cold
It
medicine.
doesn't make it any less expensive, though, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no doubt.
Before his recommendation to approve a contract to replace the Patterson Park pool HVAC and dehumidification system. For the past 8 years, this system has been failing. About a year ago, it became completely non-functional. In June of 2019, we hired Infinity Engineering to design a system that we think accomplishes the goal of making it run much more efficiently and effectively. We believe it's accomplished that. So after specifications were developed, the project was publicly bid. We had 2 people submit their bids. The Comfort Group has a lot of experience in this area. Their bid price was $984,161. Funds for this project are allocated in the Community Improvement Plan. And I'd be glad to answer any questions you'd have.
I've been over there. That's very much needed. So I'll move for approval.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one quick question. Is there any kind of a warranty or anything? I mean, is there any,
For the previous system?
no, for this system, that it's gonna work?
Yeah. I can check and see what the warranty is. There are warranties that are with this, but I can't recall exactly, but I can find it out for you, Mr. Lance.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, for $1 million, it needs to have some kind of warranty on it for.
I should have researched that before. I don't remember exactly what the warranty is on that, but I can say that the Comfort Group has a long track record of doing these projects successfully. They did the Ensworth High School natatorium. We talked to them about theirs and it's operating.
Hey, while you're there, what's the time frame on this?
25 weeks. It's a 3-month lead time to have the actual unit manufactured.
I noticed in the contract that 25 weeks, and it stated, I think, after the 25 weeks, they would not be penalized for, any delay.
So that's something we're currently working with Mr. Tucker and his staff to get the final draft of this contract. There will be damages. We haven't determined exactly. We've talked with our designer who bid the project, and we're working on that and just a couple of other details. So this is a request. Mayor, you don't have this contract tonight. We're finishing up a couple of details on it before.
Okay.
Yeah, I think after the experience we had with Middle Tennessee Boulevard, I think we definitely need some penalties in place if the project isn't finished on time.
We agree with that.
Second. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Council members had a question about warranties. And in the contract, it's on page 9 of the contract, the warranties with respect to any items other than machinery and equipment shall expire 60 months from the date of receipt by the owner of such items, and with respect to machinery and equipment, 24 months after the date of initial operation of such machinery and equipment. And the contractor agrees to correct without expense to and to the satisfaction of the owner any defects that may develop in material, workmanship, and design during the period of such warranty.
That's more of a, product type warranty, right?
No, that would be the contractor's warranty, so they would warranty their work, but the equipment itself would come with warranties as well, and so that would be for the equipment. So there'd be 2 warranties in place.
Right. So at a minimum, that's what it is. We need to get back with you on, we can provide that information to you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris. Aye. Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye, thank you, Nate. Acquisition of right-of-way and easement for Jones Boulevard. Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. We're ready to begin acquisition of right-of-way and easements for the Jones Boulevard project. The City Council has previously approved a contract for appraisals. We have those back now, and we have identified the easements and right-of-way that's needed for the project as well. Utilizing the market data brochure prepared by the appraiser with adjustments for the time lapse that was actually completed, and working with our legal department, We estimate the cost of acquiring the right-of-way and easements from 44 total parcels at about $234,000. For the acquisition, city staff proposes to purchase the required right-of-way and easements from the owners as outlined as follows. The owners will be offered a letter for the values of their affected properties and improvements and damages, plus an additional 10%. The property owner will be asked for a response within 2 weeks. If they can substantiate anything is factually wrong, such as errors in the taking, we will revise the value based on the per square foot amount. If the offer is not acceptable to the property owner, we ask that the legal department would be able to move forward, file condemnation with the appraised value being taken into court. The funding, as I mentioned, for this is requested at $234,000 for the properties involved, and it is currently programmed in the CIP. I think our budget for this was $500,000, so we're happy that it's coming under. With that, I'll be happy to answer any question.
This will be a tremendous asset to have this road improved, because from Mitchell Nelson to the Boys and Girls Club, there's just no place to get off the road, and there's kids on this road daily, and I think it's responsible of us to go ahead and get this roadway improved. So unless there's any other questions or comments, I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion second, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We have a change order. Mr. Griffith.
This is it's just the final change order to close out the Lytle Street Phase 2 project. Of course, that project consisted of reconstruction of Lytle Street from Barker to Church Street. The project increases the total contract price by $129,713.44. And that was within our bond amount for the project. Just most of the additions were due to some additional utilities that were the links were extended, which is not uncommon for an older section of town like this. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I think you guys got really close on this one, $6 million project, and you only missed it by a small amount, so I think you did a great job.
Is that in the form of a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Asking for the council to appoint Mr. Jeff Davis to the term for Mr. Rick Cantrell, who resigned after many years of faithful service on the Historical Zoning Commission.
So move.
Second.
Motion second, Ms. Wright. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Any statements to be paid?
No, sir, but there are some beer permits that we skipped. I'd like to jump back and catch
Oh.
that. There's a.
Oh, I missed licensing. I'm sorry.
That's okay. There's a restaurant at 1935 South Church Street that's changing hands, and there'll also be a name change to the restaurant. The application is in order. They do need to finish up their building codes inspections. So if you approve that tonight, we will not issue until they have completed those.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion second, Ms. Wright. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Hey,
Any oth-
Mayor, sorry to interrupt, but we just did the Historical Zoning Commission, and the Pastor Asbury was mentioned in the conversation earlier, and I didn't want to get off of the topic that we were discussing too much, but do you know what the significance of 1911 and so many churches being developed in this area were? New Madras fault line was very active at that time, and that's when Reelfoot Lake was being formed, and everybody thought the world was coming to an end. So we had 3 major earthquakes back to back, and churches popped up all over this area. And you'll notice that a lot of the churches in this community go back to that exact year.
Interesting.
There you go, I'm done.
Mr. Tucker, he doesn't have to.
Mr. Tucker's off the hook next month.
I know Shane's on cough and cold medicine.
No,
He
that's
wants to
right.
stay as
I
long as
just
we
have
can.
one comment, and I don't feel good. I'm getting on this Pretoria Falls development. You know, there's sometimes you vote on something that you look at the project as a whole, but I don't feel good about, for second reading, you know, we need to come up and talk about this at a workshop on what constitutes a deviation from the 2035 plan, and give staff some direction on what that is. You know, if somebody comes in and they're asking for a 40% increase from what we were showing in our 2035 plan, then we need to have something that says, here's the criteria to do that. Now, you know, we deviated from the 2035 plan when we're the industry that's going out at Highway 99, and I think, you know, job creation and some of those things, that's an easy thing to look at and look at goods and services. But on a development in an area that we took the time to study, and Matthew, I agree that the developer has the right to bring that through, but we really need to come up with some kind of giving y'all the direction that if, you know, and the planning commission as well, if somebody comes in and says, look, I want to increase my density 50%, then, you know, the answer may be, yeah, you can come, but council's already said, here are our guidelines to increase it. It doesn't meet it, come on, but we can't guarantee you anything. And I'm not sure, you know, I want to have that conversation next week with you guys, but I'm not sure where I'm going to be on second reading on this Pretoria Falls after getting you guys and ladies your information on where we are.
I'll just tell you this too, I didn't want to put anybody necessarily on the spot from a standpoint of saying, you know, but I think some of the questions that we ask, and I know it's good for us to give our input to you guys, but I mean, you guys are planners. We need input back from y'all, and I didn't necessarily, I mean, I guess I probably should have said it. I've been regretting not just asking you. I mean, is this the appropriate place from a planning standpoint, and not to answer it tonight, but maybe on second reading, from a planning standpoint, not an elected official standpoint or whatever, but from our professional planners on staff, is this the right place to deviate from our plan and have a higher density than what's normal there would be what would be my question for next week, sorry.
Yeah.
I think I could give you a little bit of an answer tonight if you'd like me to.
Let's council members, I hate to have that conversation without the developer being, you know, being here. But I think council members, if you want to talk to staff, maybe in between now and our next meeting, I know I want to do that, and that may be my fault, you know, to Mr. Lance's point, to where, you know, we're seeing, you know, maybe 30 or 45 minutes of a public hearing and discussion where you as planners have dealt with maybe a project for 6 months or 8 months, and, you know, you may have put lipstick on the pig to get it to where it is as good as it's going to get, but as a staff member, you may say, look, that's still not what we want to see, but you've got a right to bring it. And I think from a council, we'd like to know that. If you think that something is not, it's the best that you can get it, but you still don't think that's what's best for the city, then, you know, I hate to put y'all on the spot in these and say, well, tell me what your opinion is on this. You know, ultimately we have to make the decision, but, you know, I think that'd be good for us to know, is it too dense? Is it not dense enough? Or, you know, moving forward. And I'll have that conversation with the developer that, from my standpoint, I don't want to surprise them by the next meeting, but I'm, you know, the more we look at it, I'm still don't feel great about it.
And one thing that I can say is that as many things that come to council that you see, there are probably 2 or 3 things that don't come to council because we vet them at staff and say, no, that is, we don't agree with that, and we don't think you should waste your time making an application. So
Well, there's a fine line. We don't want to get it to where one person in the planning department has so much power that the person has to come through and say, look, I got to get this guy on my side, or there's no chance it's ever going to make it. I mean, ultimately, you've got to be able to have a collaborative effort that the people know the council is going to make that final decision. We've been there, done that through that process before. But at the same time, I think if there's a project that council or that as planning staff, you feel strongly enough to say, you know, ladies and gentlemen, this is just not to where we feel comfortable recommending that. We need to know that on the front end, I guess is what we're saying, or what I'm saying. I don't.
On a broader sense, and I'd had this conversation with folks in planning before, is that we have to do an annual review. This 2035 plan has to be a living document that we say, this is on the table, these are the development industry, reasonable expectation to the development community and to existing property owners. That's what our job should be. And we can't do that if we don't periodically look at what that 2035 document did and is this what is reasonable to expect in this area. And then we can look at infrastructure demands, highways, schools, and all those other things and see if we are making that 30,000-foot look at what's happening, instead of having to, and I feel uncomfortable too, that so much of our decision-making happens, you know, right now, under a very tight schedule, and each of us are going to make those decisions given different parameters as to what we think is important for that decision. It shouldn't be a particular proposal. It should be the development community can design their programs, their developments, to what we have perceived to be the appropriate development, our density, or whatever happens in there. And then we have also planned for the infrastructure to meet that expectation. And we have to have those broader discussions before somebody sets something on the table for us to consider. So.
And not to dominate, the thing that I keep struggling with, and this is after sitting up here and, you know, Ronnie hasn't been able to see some of the discussions that we've had. You know, the odds of us getting Asbury Lane to city standards, probably in our lifetime, in my lifetime, it's just not going to happen. And, you know, we've had the discussions and sat with the owners of the property that's, you know, is widely documented about the different plans, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. You know, so when we're approving developments on roads that we know we can't do anything about, even if we piecemeal them together, there's no way that we're going to be able to widen that road. So that's the part where I think as a council, if staff, y'all see on some things there's the opportunity where development improves the situation. But there's some times when you look at development that you can't fix it. And that may be the opportunity that if somebody buys property in an area that you know you don't have sewer access, or you know that you don't have the ability to improve the road, when they come through, it's like, hey, if you've put a piece of property under contract that we know the infrastructure's not there and we know we can't get it anytime soon, then shame on you for putting the piece of property under contract, because we can't fix it. And that's the part I'm struggling with on Asbury Lane, is there's no solution to improve that road from Medical Center Parkway back to Asbury Road. It's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen anytime soon, no matter if we piecemeal developments together or not. So the traffic study, I would say, is going to come back, and it's going to say, y'all got a bunch of cars that are going to be coming, and you really can't do anything to that road.
And just to speak to Mr. Shacklett's point, you know, we are very aware, and I think Mr. Anthony had spoken to you at one of your workshops about updating our comprehensive plan. Mr. Anthony had kind of set that aside for the time being while we were working on our sewer allocation ordinance, knowing that when we update the comprehensive plan, it will be impacted by that sewer allocation ordinance if it's adopted, and in what form the sewer allocation ordinance is adopted. So we very much know that is something that we need to understand.
Well, it's good for everybody concerned, because, you know, when we do something like this, you put and make a decision to put houses in a place where the infrastructure doesn't support it, the market will drive what happens, and you put the developer in a bad position. So, I mean, we've got to, I mean, this is a holistic approach to looking at what we do as we develop and we grow. And it's beyond time for us to do this.
And it's not anything that we haven't done. I mean, I look at Darren out there, out on Rutherford Boulevard. We've said, if you buy property out on Rutherford Boulevard and John Bragg Highway, we can't serve sewer out there. We don't have capacity. So, I mean, I think if we know that those situations are there with infrastructure on roads at the same time, we may just have to look at it and say, we can't figure this one out. If you've got an idea as a developer and you can get the right of way to come back and show us how we can fix the road, then we're on board. So, all right. Sorry to go on a rant, but it was just bothering me. So, thank you for what you're doing, Matthew. All right. Any other things, Craig? Craig, are we meeting next Thursday?
I don't know yet. I haven't received a whole lot. I haven't received anything for next Thursday's meeting, so I'll see tomorrow if we have, and I'll put an email out.
I hate to bring this up, but for those of us that do have younger kids, remember that the 31st is Halloween, and some of us would probably want to go trick-or-treating with our kids, not to put any pressure on you. So,
Likes free candy.
Free candy?
Oh, to that point, trick or treat on the square is happening on the 31st.
Yep.
too.
Right.
All right. Appreciate it. We'll stand adjourned.